It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
Hey, hope your weekend is going well. Here we are back again on a Sunday, June the 8th. And for some of us, it's like the weekend is just starting over again, with Monday tomorrow off on this long weekend. However, that isn't the case for everyone. But if you are having a long weekend, enjoy it. I see the Victorian ski season, if you are a skier, has officially opened this weekend. Christmas come early for the skiers, and the resorts across the Alpine region have recorded up to 20 centimetres of fresh skiable snow. And it's been a crazy week, very, very busy. Kicked it off on Monday with Nicola Powell from Domain. She was talking about those energy-efficient houses. They are selling for a whole lot more than non-energy efficient houses, and we'll catch up with part of that podcast in just a moment, like we will with Emma Slate, who is here on Tuesday, the CEO of Turner Real Estate in Adelaide. We spoke to Brad about tiny homes, container homes. Really interesting conversation with him. Mark McGoldrick was here. He's an auctioneer in NZ. He was giving us a breakdown on his local real estate market, particularly with all of the rate cuts that they have had. And then we had Carmen Briggs, and she was in from The Gap in Brisbane. So we'll bring you all of those interviews coming up in just a moment. Have a great Sunday.
Grab your weekly dose of inspiration to help build a real estate portfolio. We talk to the best in the business every day. Learn from the professionals and know your property with us.
And she said to me, "Oh, that looks interesting." And then walked up to the mirror, pushed one of the corners in, and out pops this mirror. It swings completely open into a cavity, Nicola.
Oh, wow. What was in the cavity?
Well, there was nothing in the cavity, unfortunately, but the cavity was big enough. Like, it was actually a room big enough to put a queen-size bed in. And here I am living in this house for 5 years, and I had no idea that it was there.
Wow. And I wonder what made her, do that. Like, something must have triggered that she thought this looked odd.
That's the thing about real estate agents, I guess. She could see that was a large built-in mirror into the wall, and something told her straight away, her senses, whatever, and she was onto it. She even pushed the right corner. I mean, my eyes nearly popped.
Maybe that was meant to be the built-in wardrobe, the walk-in wardrobe.
Yeah, well, you could actually sort of develop it and put all of your towels and whatnot, so it's kind of like an ensuite into the towels from your bathroom. Be very, very cool.
Yes, sounds it.
All right, now talking of cool, we're going to talk about some energy-efficient houses. Now, I found this really interesting. You've done some research here. You got some numbers. Energy-efficient houses now sell for 118 grand more than non-energy efficient homes, with some suburbs seeing price differences of 75%. That's incredible.
It is incredible. And this was our latest sustainability in property report. And what we did is we used keywords within domain listings data, and it allowed us to determine whether that property had energy efficient features or not. And what we found is that having energy efficient features in a home acts as a market multiplier. And as you said, it adds tens of thousands of dollars to the price point. And this has been something that is really ingrained in our housing market. When you look back over the time series back to kind of even 2020, there was always this price premium for a more energy efficient home. And even when we saw the market dip, you remember back in 23, we saw a bit of a dip in price. You look at that price premium for an energy efficient home, it barely flinched. So we've always had this price premium. Efficiency commands a premium, and I think that premium has been proving remarkably resilient over time.
Yeah, the other aspect to this is north-facing orientation on houses, because this can actually add, as your numbers suggest, up to 375 grand onto the price. You look at double glazing, you can get an extra 145,000. and solar, 140 grand. I mean, this is major money, not insignificant.
It is. And I think some of those really high-performing features, such as double glazing, can really add a significant amount. And the difference between our different capital cities is truly quite eye-watering. Take Sydney as an example. So a house in Sydney that has double glazing sells for $495,000 higher than one that doesn't. And one that is north-facing in Sydney sells for a whopping $615,000 more.
Yeah, well, we've noticed over the last 5 years that the demographic is just growing more and more. So we have three main demographics at the moment. Your first one, which we've already touched on, is the investor market, looking at for dual living or Airbnbs or anything like that. One of our second biggest clients is someone who's just bought land in the middle of building their own house. As we know of builders at the moment, they're taking between 12 to 18 months. Rather than having to rent a place for 12 to 18 months, what they'll do is they'll put one of these containers on their land while the build happens. And then that way they've got a comfortable space to live in, which is a lot more cost effective. And then once their house is ready, they can use that as an outhouse, a Airbnb, or they can even sell that unit back off once it's done. And our third biggest clientele we're actually seeing at the moment is families not wanting to put their parents into a nursing home or something like that, but they also don't want them crammed up in their own house. So we're finding a lot of our clients are just buying one of these for their backyard, and that way they can still live close to family without all the headaches.
What a great idea that is if you are looking at building, because as you say, you have got to go out, you've got to do a rental. That becomes a bit of a headache anyway, depending on where you might end up moving to. If it's on the same build site, you're much closer to all of the action that is taking place. And yes, you could just turn it into an Airbnb. Now, have you got people that have come to you, or maybe they've rung you with an inquiry and they've said, well, we're just not too sure whether this is for us. And you've said, well, come and have a look, go for a walkthrough. They go for a walkthrough and then their brain blows up and they go, this is something I could live in.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because that's one of the most common things. A lot of people who haven't seen one of these container homes in person, I know they're not going to know what it feels like. So one of the big things is they say, this is going to be too small, it's going to be uncomfortable. And then the second they get there and see the good use of space that we do, just makes it feel that much more open and habitable.
And what about somebody saying, well, I wouldn't mind joining two 40-foot shipping containers together so that I've got a lot more space. Have you done that before?
Yeah, we sure have. And that is probably our number one question. I have a different solution I've been working with, especially with my last few clients. And rather than joining two containers together and having to spend all the additional money on welding and then also never being able to transport them again, is having, for example, two 40-foot containers side by side with a deck in between and a roof over the top. So what that does is it creates 48 square meters of living space, but then you've also got a 3x12 or a 5x12 undercover deck where you can have a nice entertaining area or something like that. And to be able to build that deck and roof between the two is going to cost you the same to weld them, and then you can also move them in the future if needed.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a winner to me. What sort of a cost is that, exactly with what you've just talked about, having the deck in between? What sort of money?
Yeah, so there's a lot of variables, but we can still give an average cost kind of thing. So per container at the moment, they're around $70,000 per container. And then to have a deck of that size built, you'd usually be looking around the 12 to 15 grand mark, and then about 7 to 8 grand for a roof. So just trying to do some quick maths on that. All up, you're looking at about $170,000 to $180,000, and that includes all your services like your plumbing, your footing, and your electrical.
Yeah, so from a sales perspective, we've seen that Adelaide's been pretty steady year on year with sales volume. Let's have a look at that first. We've had a slight increase in the number of listings, but when we look interstate, we've seen a couple of cities have really been struggling to get that stock back on the market, and I think that's where Adelaide's really stood out. Ourselves in Perth have got an increase year on year on how many properties are on the market, where places like Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane have really struggled with that housing stock. So I think that's helping the market bubble along a bit. Similarly, we're seeing the same with rental listings as well, is we're pretty consistent. We really haven't seen much of a change in the amount of stock that we're seeing on the market, but we are starting to see a bit of a trend of there being more supply and vacancy rates easing a little.
Let's have a look at the median house price right at the moment. That is around 847,000. Unit median price, 612,000. That is up year on year, 6.2%. Just having a look, there's a lot of those units that have sold in the last 12 months, 583 of them. Got a rental yield of 5.7. So, yeah, plenty of movement in those units, Emma.
We've really seen a change in who's buying those units over the last 5 years as well. I think before units were seen, not exclusively, but there was a really strong investor focus on those units, and we'd see units typically perhaps within 5 to 10 k's of the city being picked up as a great sort of first investment. What we're now also seeing is because of the price point, people are using that to move in, and that's actually their first home. So that's definitely increased the buyer pool in that unit market, and we're seeing more and more people kind of out of necessity using the unit as their first building block in the property market. It's still great to see them getting into the property market, but you can see the effect of affordability changing the demographic of who's buying there.
But the cash rate, it has been tumbling. And what is the vibe with relation to your property market? How's the sentiment feeling? Because the other day you got another rate cut.
The fifth in a row, yeah. So we're pretty excited in the industry. And hey, it has increased activity out there in the market, particularly at the lower end of the market. So our first home buyer rates are really, really strong. Around about 25% nationwide is our first home buyers. But I would say in the Hamilton auction market, we haven't quite seen it multiplying the average number of bidders too much. We're seeing it better, but I think what you were saying earlier, Craig, is that external conditions that have still got people a little bit watchful and a little bit cautious, but definitely better. Yes, definitely better. I think we're down to around about 3.5%, which we've come from 5.75% OCR, so much better.
It's still very much a painful situation for many people that bought just prior to everything really going bananas. Now, I did mention that you are an auctioneer. I'd like to ask you this. What are some of the differences for people attending auctions between NZ and Australia? What are some of those differences between the two countries?
Well, I think first and foremost, if you go to an auction in New Zealand, you're probably going to strike the auctioneer as a hell of a lot more handsome or better looking. It's probably the first thing. It's quite different. The Aussies love an on-site, and we're slowly catching up with that. And we love the in-rooms because, we can plough through 25, 28 in a session, in 2 or 3 hours. So it kind of works, and we can control that environment and give to a certain degree anonymity to the bidders because, of course, you don't have to legally register in New Zealand. There's no paddles. You just come along and chuck your hand up. Sure, we try and identify those bidders and actually register them. It's a lot more circumspect to do that. And I wonder if the trend is changing in Aussie, where a lot of the time it was the real estate agent who was calling their own auctions. I know that the role has become a lot more specialised and not so much the case in Australia. I think in Victoria that still might be the case. So that would be one of the major differences. I think as in the Kiwi side, we possibly tend to start the bidding a bit lower. The old saying, start it low, watch it grow, just trying to leverage that psychology of, engaged in the auction and getting involved and getting into a good tussle. Find that one works, but I think the Aussies start a bit closer to that reserved price. And other than that, I think it's just the same old deal. Sometimes you get bidders that are comfortable and love it, and sometimes you got people who are absolutely bricking it in the back row and sometimes don't bid because they were too nervous.
Oh, Craig, it's been dramatic. I was only saying the other day, I can remember sitting in my office 20 years ago, talking to buyers on the phone, explaining that we had substantial homes for $200,000 with very large blocks and lots of amenities. And then I can hear myself over the years increasing that. And now we're up to a very basic home being sold over $1 million here in the Gap. So it has changed a lot.
Different time, isn't it? Different era. 20 years ago, no social media, no phones, no mobiles. Well, they probably were around but yes, the way in which you conducted real estate, horses for courses.
Yes, I agree. It has changed dramatically with the technology that underlies all of the way that we can expose properties to buyers. But I think the fundamentals are still very important. I really love meeting with the buyers and the sellers and having face-to-face conversations and showing them homes. So the technology is certainly there, but it doesn't replace that human contact.
Yeah, human contact is code for authenticity. And because you come from real estate 20 years ago, you're a different animal completely to somebody that's getting involved in real estate now. They're used to the social media. That's why we see a different style emerging. But you're right on the money. It's all about that human contact face to face and being as authentic as you can.
Oh, I agree. And one of the things that's interesting at the moment is some of the younger buyers, when they're wanting to submit an offer on a home, they will just send an email or a text message. I find that really interesting because I encourage them to pick up the phone so we can actually talk about their expectations and their needs and just talking through the whole process. And I always joke around and say, why don't we use the old-fashioned way and why don't we just chat on the phone about your interest this afternoon instead of sending me an email? And it's a really lovely start to the relationship.
They're not interested in that. Of course, you are old school like me. Yeah, let's have a conversation. But the amount of times that people go to the email or the text or they say, jump on WhatsApp, people say that to me. I go, no, just give me a call on the phone, thanks.
I think it's really important, Craig, because when you think about it, you can be contacted via WhatsApp or Messenger or an email or a text message. And there's so many different ways that an offer could be submitted by a buyer. And you would be terribly disappointed if the agent that you were submitting that to missed your offer and you missed out on buying a dream home. I always think for such a big purchase, and it is a very big purchase in everyone's lives, is that personal contact is just paramount.
I just want to come back to the gap here for a moment because it has changed over the years. One of the things you were telling me off here is that you always used to have local people buying local, but now you've got them coming from interstate, and that probably is testament to just how big the gap has got in both land mass size, I guess, and reputation.
It is interesting because it has changed a lot. The reason why we are such an attractive suburb is we have a very, very good state high school here in the Gap. It has a fantastic music program and it is advanced in a lot of its learnings. We are a very safe suburb. We have very little crime. We have a local police station, so the police are part of the community. And so I guess the best way to frame it is we're just a really kind community. It's a lovely place to live.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.